The fallout the gala's echoes had barely faded when the consequences began to take shape. The next morning, the estate buzzed with hushed conversation. Some of the guests had been deeply moved by Hila's courage, praising her bravery in private phone calls that trickled back to Grayson. But others, equally powerful, saw it as a stain on his carefully crafted image. Unprofessional, one advisor remarked over breakfast. Disruptive, another muttered. The more venomous critics called it a spectacle, insisting that sentiment had no place in boardrooms or press releases. Grayson listened with a face carved from stone. Inside, his pride smoldered. He told himself that the outburst had not been Hila's fault, but rather the meddling influence of the maid who had dared to give her a voice. A maid who, by her very presence on that stage, had reminded the world that even the mighty Grayson Hale could not keep his house perfectly in order. To him, it was not an act of love, it was betrayal. By afternoon, he had summoned the head of staff. His instructions were cold and final. She goes. End of week. I don't want her near my daughter again. The order was carried out with the quiet efficiency of the household. Maya was not dismissed outright, but the whispers grew louder. Her shifts were cut, her tasks reduced to the most menial corners of the estate, and though she bore it without complaint, she felt the walls closing in. The child's Pliella sensed the change almost immediately. She noticed the way Maya no longer served in the dining room, the way she passed quickly down corridors with her gaze lowered, the way she avoided the garden where they had once shared lessons. When she asked where her friend was, the staff offered vague excuses, their words carefully chosen to shield her from the truth. But Ella was not a child blind to the world. She had learned to read faces, to understand silence better than anyone. One afternoon, she burst into Maya's small quarters without warning. Her rabbit clutched tightly in her arms. Her hands moved frantically, her face red with frustration. Why are you hiding from me? Why won't they let me see you? Maya knelt quickly, pulling the girl into her arms. Her own eyes burned, but she forced her signs to remain calm. It isn't you. They don't understand. They think I'm wrong for helping. Hila's tears spilled over, her fingers pounding out words against Maya's chest. I don't want anyone else. I need you. Promise you won't leave. The promise was impossible, but Maya could not break her heart. She pressed a hand to her cheek and signed with unwavering conviction. As long as I can, I will stay. You are never alone. Grayson's reckoning that evening. Grayson found his daughter asleep in her nursery, her rabbit tucked beneath her chin, her face still damp from tears. For a long time, he stood in the doorway watching her. He had built his empire on clarity and control. Yet here was a situation that defied both. His daughter was slipping beyond his grasp, forming bonds he neither approved of nor understood. In his mind, he justified his decisions. He told himself he was protecting her from dependency, that a billionaire's daughter needed strength, not coddling. But in the silence of the nursery, those words felt hollow. He remembered the sight of her on the gala stage, her small hands cutting through the air with defiance. The look in her eyes was not weakness, it was power. And yet, it was a power she had found not through him, but through someone he considered beneath them. For the first time, Grayson questioned himself. But pride is a stubborn master, and instead of yielding, he steeled his resolve. He would separate them. The maid would leave. His daughter would learn discipline. That was the only way. The dismissal 2 days later, Maya was called into the study. The head of staff stood stiffly by the door while Grayson sat behind his massive desk, his hands clasped, his eyes hard. You've done more than your duties required, he said coldly. But in this household, rules matter more than sentiment. You've overstepped your place, and that cannot continue. You will finish out the week, then you will go. A reference will be arranged for simpler work elsewhere. Maya's heart clenched, but she kept her back straight. With respect, sir, she said softly. Your daughter needs more than silence. She needs someone to listen. His eyes flashed with anger, though beneath it was something more complicated. She has me. No, Maya replied, her voice trembling but firm. She has your name, your money, but she doesn't have you. The words landed like a strike. For a long moment, Grayson said nothing, his jaw tight, his face unreadable. Finally, he dismissed her with a sharp gesture. That will be all. Maya bowed her head, retreating with dignity intact, though her heart ached with the certainty that she had just signed the end of something irreplaceable. First again, the next days were agony for Hila. She searched for Maya in the hallways, only to be told she was busy. She waited in the garden, but Maya never came. At meals, she signed desperately, trying to catch her father's eye, but he only told her to eat. The world had returned to its old rhythm of polished surfaces and polite indifference, and in that rhythm she felt herself disappearing again. One night, she curled beneath her blankets, clutching her rabbit, her small hands moving furiously in the darkness. I am here, I am here. Please see me. But no one was there to translate. Her words dissolved into the silence, unanswered, unseen. The crisis, the breaking point, came suddenly. A thunderstorm rolled over the city one evening, lightning flashing against the estate's glass walls, thunder shaking its foundations. Ayla had always feared storms, not because of their noise. She could not hear that, but because of the way the world seemed to shudder, lights flickering, vibrations thrumming through the floor. That night, as the storm raged, a power surge struck the estate. Lights went out. The grand mansion plunged into darkness. In the confusion, Ayla bolted from her room, clutching her rabbit, her small figure vanishing into the labyrinth of hallways. Panic spread quickly among the staff. Grayson barked orders, security searched the wings, but the child was nowhere to be found. It was Maya who knew where she would be. Without hesitation, she slipped away from the chaos and headed toward the garden. Lightning illuminated the sky as she pushed open the glass doors, rain drenching the paths. And there, beneath the oak tree where they had first spoken, she found Ayla, curled in the wet grass, trembling, her hands pressed to her chest. Maya rushed forward, gathering the girl into her arms. It's all right, she whispered, though the words meant nothing. Instead, she signed them firmly, her wet hands moving with steady precision. Safe. You are safe. Ayla clung to her, sobbing silently, her face pressed against Maya's neck. It was in that moment, illuminated by lightning and soaked by rain, that Grayson appeared, his eyes wide with terror. He froze at the sight, his daughter wrapped in the arms of the woman he had tried to cast out. A father's awakening. For a long moment, the three of them stood in the storm, the billionaire, the maid, and the child who had been silenced for too long. Grayson's breath caught as he watched his daughter cling to the woman who had risked everything for her. He saw the way her trembling ceased as Maya's hands signed reassurance, the way her small body trusted without question. And in that instant his pride crumbled. All his life he had believed control was strength, that wealth was security. That image was everything. But none of those things had comforted his daughter in the storm. None of those things had given her courage to speak at the gala. None of those things had given her the love she so desperately needed. It was this woman, this maid, who had done what he could not. Grayson stepped closer, rain streaming down his face. For the first time in years, his voice trembled. Ayla, he whispered, reaching out. She turned her tear-streaked face toward him, her hands moving weakly. See me, and at last he did. The gathering storm. The days following the luncheon passed with a heavy stillness that clung to the Hale estate like fog. Outwardly, everything ran with the same clockwork precision. Staff polished, cooked, and served. Grayson met with investors and advisors. Ella drifted silently from room to room like a ghost in her own home. Yet beneath the surface, something had shifted. Maya could feel it in the girl's gaze, in the new steel that lingered in her small hands when she signed, in the restless energy that seemed to ripple through her like a storm waiting to break. Maya worried for her. The courage she had seen blossoming in Ayla was beautiful, but it was dangerous in this world. Grayson Hale lived his life by appearances. To him, control was strength and deviation was weakness. Ella's attempts to speak her truth, even silently, were seeds of rebellion against that order. Maya feared that if those seeds grew too quickly, Grayson's response would be harsher than the child could endure. Yet Maya also knew there was no stopping it. Once a soul has tasted what it means to be seen, it cannot return to invisibility. Ella had begun to recognize her own worth, to test the edges of her silence, and that spark could not be extinguished. It would only grow no matter how fiercely the world tried to ignore it. The gala announcement, the storm broke sooner than anyone expected. Grayson announced a grand gala to celebrate the launch of his company's latest innovation, a night meant to dazzle shareholders and silence competitors. The estate would host hundreds of guests, the ballroom transformed into a stage for his triumph. Every detail was planned, chandeliers polished until they burned like suns, orchestras rehearsed until every note was flawless, menus crafted by celebrity chefs. For Grayson, this event was more than celebration. It was conquest. But for Ella, it became something else entirely. She overheard her father speaking with his assistant, his words careless but sharp. Make sure Ella is presented properly. She doesn't need to do anything. Just sit there and look pleasant. No incidents this time. The girl's small hands tightened around her rabbit as she listened. Presented properly. Look pleasant. As though she were no more than another piece of decor in his grand display. Rage burned quietly in her chest. She was not a vase of flowers or a golden chandelier. She was his daughter, and for once she would not be silent. That night in the nursery, she signed furiously to Maya. I want to speak at the gala. I want them to see me. Maya's heart thudded. The risk was enormous, but so was the child's determination. She knelt before her and signed slowly. If you are sure, I will stand with you, but you must be ready. They may not listen at first. Ila's gray-blue eyes shone with fierce resolve. Then I will make them listen. Preparation. The week before the gala became their secret rehearsal. Beneath the oak tree in the garden, they practiced sentences again and again. Maya helped Ila shape her hands with clarity, taught her how to hold her head high, how to let her eyes speak even louder than her fingers. The girl absorbed every lesson with the kind of determination Maya had rarely seen in adults, let alone children. Each mistake became another attempt, each attempt another step toward confidence. Maya also prepared herself, though quietly. She knew if Ila signed before hundreds of powerful strangers, someone would need to give her words voice. Grayson might dismiss her, the crowd might laugh or look away, but Maya could not allow the effort to vanish into the void. She would be the interpreter, the bridge. She would be her voice. In the evenings, when Maya returned to her small room, exhaustion weighing down her limbs, she thought of what they were about to attempt. Fear gnawed at her, whispering of consequences, dismissal, disgrace, perhaps worse. But then she remembered the cruel laughter of the businessmen on the patio, the indifference of Grayson at the dining table, and most of all, the trembling hope in Ila's eyes. Fear paled in comparison. Some moments in life demanded risk. This was one of them. The gala begins. The night of the gala arrived like thunder. Limousines lined the drive. Jewels sparkled under the glow of chandeliers, and cameras flashed as reporters captured every detail of Grayson Hale's empire on display. The ballroom glittered with wealth, every table adorned with silver and crystal, every guest adorned with pride. The orchestra played grand crescendos as Grayson made his entrance, tall and commanding, his presence alone drawing the attention of the room. At his side, dressed in a gown of soft blue satin, walked Ella. Her curls gleamed under the lights, her small hands clutching the rabbit hidden discreetly at her side. To the guests, she looked like a doll, delicate, beautiful, silent. That was all they expected. That was all they wanted to see. Maya, stationed discreetly with the staff, watched with a pounding heart. She saw the way Ila's fingers twitched against her gown, the restless energy sparking in her eyes. She knew the moment was near. The break of silence. The evening unfolded with speeches and toasts, applause and laughter echoing against marble walls. Grayson stood at the center, delivering his vision of the future with practiced charisma. Investors cheered. Journalists scribbled notes, cameras flashed. When he concluded, a wave of admiration swept the room. It was the perfect performance. And then Ila stepped forward. The chatter faltered as the small girl moved into the open space, her chin lifted, her shoulders squared. She raised her hands high where all could see and began to sign. Slowly, deliberately, her fingers shaped words that carried the weight of her soul. My name is Ella, I can speak. This is my voice. A murmur rippled through the crowd, confusion mixing with curiosity. Many frowned, uncertain of what they were seeing. Others shifted uncomfortably, embarrassed by the child's interruption. Grayson's smile froze, his eyes darkening with warning. Maya could not let the moment be smothered. She stepped forward, her voice steady, translating each sign with clarity. My name is Ella, I can speak. This is my voice. The crowd hushed, all eyes turning. Ella continued, her small hands fierce with conviction. I am not broken. I am not weak. I want to be seen. Maya echoed her words, her voice carrying through the hall. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was not the silence of dismissal. It was the silence of impact, of realization settling into unwilling hearts, cracks in the armor. For a long moment, the ballroom remained still. Then came a smattering of applause, hesitant at first, then growing as some guests, moved by the child's courage, clapped more firmly. Others remained stiff, unsure of what to do, unwilling to break the veneer of wealth with sincerity. But it did not matter. Ayla's eyes shone with triumph. For the first time in her life, she had spoken before the world, and the world had heard. Grayson's face remained unreadable, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. He did not rebuke her, but neither did he applaud. His pride warred with something deeper, something he had spent years suppressing. He saw in his daughter a strength he could not understand, a defiance that both unsettled and intrigued him. But above all, he saw the Maid, standing as her voice, her ally, her anchor. And that realization struck him like a blow. As the evening resumed, as guests whispered and cameras captured the unprecedented moment, Maya knew nothing would be the same. They had broken the silence. The question now was whether the world, and Grayson Hale himself, would allow it to last. A chance encounter. The garden at the Hale estate was designed not merely as a place of beauty, but as a statement of wealth. Winding paths of white stone stretched through trimmed hedges shaped into perfect symmetry. Fountains whispered cool music into the air, and roses bloomed in neat rows, their petals catching the morning light like jewels. Yet for all its perfection, it felt empty, as though the beauty existed only for photographs in magazines, not for life. Guests rarely wandered its paths. Staff passed quickly on errands, and Grayson himself seldom paused to breathe in its peace. It was, in truth, the one place where silence could exist without question. Maya discovered this by accident one afternoon, when she was asked to collect fresh herbs from the greenhouse at the far end of the grounds. She welcomed the errand, grateful for a chance to escape the constant eyes and whispers inside the house. The humiliation of the fountain incident still clung to her like damp fabric, and though she worked diligently, she could feel the tension in every glance from senior staff. To them, she was a problem waiting to happen, a worker whose presence in the household had already stirred too much noise. As she crossed through the garden, basket in hand, she stopped short. There, beneath the shade of a sprawling oak, sat Ela. The little girl had tucked herself away in the grass, her white dress spread around her like a fragile cloud. In her lap rested the stuffed rabbit Maya had seen once before, its ears worn from constant affection. Ella's eyes were fixed on the petals of a fallen rose she twirled between her fingers, her lips curved downward in thought. She looked so small, so out of place in the grandeur of the estate, that for a moment Maya's chest ached. Ela noticed her and stiffened, the rose slipping from her hand. Her fingers tightened around the rabbit, her gaze uncertain. Then slowly, cautiously, she raised one small hand and signed a word. "Hello," Maya's breath caught. She glanced around to make sure no one else was watching before she knelt, lowering the basket beside her. Carefully, she signed back. "Hello, may I sit?" The girl hesitated only a moment before nodding. And just like that, the silence of the garden was no longer empty. It was a bridge, fragile but real, connecting two worlds. The language of trust. For several minutes, they sat in companionable quiet. Ella pulled at the blades of grass while Maya adjusted the folds of her apron, unsure how to begin. She knew the risks of this moment. If anyone saw them, if anyone told Grayson, her dismissal would be immediate. Yet she also knew she could not simply walk away. There was something sacred in the way the child's eyes had softened, something that told Maya this was the first time Ela had chosen to let someone into her small circle of trust. Finally, Maya lifted her hands, her movements slow and careful. "You are safe here." Ella's lips curved slightly, though not into a full smile. Her hands responded clumsily. "No one talks to me," Maya swallowed hard. She thought of all the staff who rushed past, all the guests who laughed loudly in the ballroom without once looking toward the steps where the girl sat alone. She thought of Grayson himself, consumed by numbers and appearances, blind to the soul that lived just a few feet from his reach. Her heart tightened. "I will talk to you," she signed firmly, her gaze steady. "Always." The little girl blinked, and this time her small mouth curved into something closer to a real smile. Her fingers moved again, more confidently now. "Teach me more." And so in the dappled light beneath the oak, the lessons began. Maya taught her the signs for simple words: tree, flower, friend, safe. Ella repeated them with fierce concentration, her brow furrowed, her little hands fumbling but determined. Every successful sign made her shoulders straighten, every correction accepted with a nod of eagerness. To anyone else it would have seemed like play, but to Ela it was more. It was proof that she could be heard, that her silence was not emptiness but simply another language waiting for someone willing to listen. As the lesson stretched on, Maya felt a warmth she hadn't known in years. It was the same warmth she used to feel watching her mother teach children. The glow of seeing a spark light in a child's eyes when they realized they mattered. For the first time since stepping into this household, Maya felt she had a purpose greater than carrying trays or polishing silver. Shadows of the past, their meetings beneath the oak, became a secret rhythm. Each day when duties allowed, Maya found her way into the garden, and each day Ela was there waiting, her rabbit in tow, her small hands eager to learn. Their bond grew quickly, built not on words but on the quiet trust that comes from being seen. One afternoon, after Ela had successfully signed an entire sentence, "The rabbit is my friend," she looked up at Maya with curiosity. Her hands moved slowly. "How do you know my language?" Maya's throat tightened. She rarely spoke of her past, even to herself. But the child's eyes were so earnest, so hungry for understanding, that she could not brush the question aside. She drew in a breath and signed carefully. "My mother was a teacher. She taught children like you. She wanted everyone to feel heard." Ela tilted her head, processing. "Your mother taught you?" "Yes," Maya replied, her fingers moving with steady rhythm. "She believed silence is not weakness. She believed silence is another kind of strength." For a long moment, Ela was quiet. Then she leaned against Maya's arm, her small weight pressing gently, her rabbit squished between them. It was the first physical gesture of affection she had offered since they met. Maya closed her eyes briefly, letting the warmth of that trust settle into her heart. But even as the bond deepened, a shadow loomed. One afternoon, when Maya was leaving the garden, basket in hand, she noticed one of the senior maids watching from a distance. The woman's eyes were sharp, her lips pressed thin, and though she said nothing, her gaze carried a silent warning. Maya's stomach dropped. She knew then that their secret would not remain safe for long. The threat it did not take long for the confrontation to come. That evening, as Maya folded linens in the laundry room, the senior maid stepped inside. Her presence was cold, her voice clipped, each word delivered with the precision of a blade. "I saw you in the garden today." "With her?" Maya straightened, her hands tightening around the fabric. She was alone. She wanted company. The older woman's eyes narrowed. "That is not your place. You know the rules. You've already made a spectacle once. If Mr. Hale discovers you've been meddling again, you won't simply be dismissed. You'll be blacklisted. No wealthy household will hire you after this." The threat hung heavy in the air. Maya's chest tightened. She knew the woman was right. Employment in households like this was a fragile lifeline. One misstep could end not only her position here, but her chances anywhere else. And yet, as she thought of Ela's small hands signing friend, as she remembered the trust in her gray-blue eyes, Maya felt a quiet resolve stir within her. "I won't hurt her," Maya said softly, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. "I won't leave her alone." The older maid scoffed, shaking her head. "Then you're a fool. And fools don't last long here." She left without another word, but the warning lingered like smoke in the room. Maya folded the last linen with trembling fingers, her mind torn between fear and determination. She knew danger lay ahead, but she also knew she could not abandon the child who had finally found a voice through her. As night fell over the estate, the garden lay silent once more. But beneath the oak, unseen by anyone else, two worlds had already begun to change. The silent girl, a house of glass and noise. The Hale estate glittered like a palace made of light. Chandeliers sparkled through floor-to-ceiling windows, spilling golden beams over marble floors polished so smooth they mirrored the faces of the wealthy guests. Laughter clinked through crystal glasses, mingling with the sharp notes of a string quartet. Waiters in starched white shirts glided across the hall, balancing trays of wine and hors d'oeuvres. The celebration was not small. It was a spectacle, the kind that made headlines. Billionaire tech tycoon Grayson Hale was famous for throwing events as extravagant as his business ventures. Tonight was another one of those nights. Investors, politicians, celebrities, all gathered under his roof to toast his empire. In the midst of this brilliance, Maya adjusted the apron at her waist. She stood at the edge of the ballroom, a tray of mini cheesecakes balanced carefully in her hands. Her shoes pinched her toes, her bun sagged after hours of rushing back and forth, and sweat traced a line down the back of her neck, despite the perfectly controlled air conditioning. Maya had worked in wealthy homes before, but there was something different about the Hale estate. Everything here screamed power. Staff moved like shadows, seen but never acknowledged. Guests strutted as though the earth beneath them existed for their entertainment. And at the center of it all, Grayson Hale himself, tall, immaculately dressed, silver hair combed back, his smile bright enough to outshine the chandeliers. Maya watched him clink glasses with a senator, his hand resting casually on the back of a model's chair. He looked like a man who had everything, who commanded everything. But for all the noise and motion in that glittering hall, Maya noticed someone quiet, outside. Through the tall glass doors that opened to the back patio, a little girl sat alone on the cold stone steps. The girl on the steps. The child was delicate, almost fragile, framed by curls the color of summer wheat. She wore a white dress with layers of ruffles, the kind that seemed made for photographs, not play. A small butterfly barrette, slightly crooked, clung stubbornly to her hair. Her hands, tiny and pale, clenched the fabric of her skirt as though it anchored her. Her name, Maya knew from whispered gossip among the staff, was Ela Hale, Grayson Hale's only daughter. 5 years old, deaf since birth. Most of the guests didn't even glance at her. Some didn't know she existed. Others perhaps thought it impolite to mention her, as though her silence diminished the family's shine. The staff were no better, too busy fulfilling orders to pause. Security, stiff and sharp in their suits, kept eyes on the perimeter, not the child. But Maya noticed. She hesitated only a moment, then shifted her tray onto a nearby ledge. The cheesecakes would keep. Carefully, she stepped outside, her shoes clicking softly against the stone. The night air was cooler here, scented faintly of roses from the manicured garden. "Are you okay, sweet girl?" Maya asked softly. But she didn't just speak, she signed. Her hands moved gracefully. "Are you okay?" The little girl blinked up at her, startled. For a moment, no response came. Her eyes, a pale gray blue like morning fog, searched Maya's face with suspicion. Then slowly, clumsily, she lifted her hand. "Hello." The sign was wobbly, uncertain, but it was there. Maya's lips curved into a gentle smile. She didn't overreact. She didn't gush or praise like others might when a child did something special. Instead, her smile carried quiet recognition. A smile that said, "I see you," she signed back. "Can I sit with you?" Ella hesitated, then gave a single small nod. Maya lowered herself onto the stone step, leaving just enough distance to be respectful. For a moment they sat in silence, the laughter from inside muffled by glass and distance. Slowly, Ela shifted, letting her small shoulder brush against Maya's arm. The touch was light as a whisper, but it carried more warmth than any word could. The crack in the night, the peace lasted only a few minutes. Bang! The sharp crack of glass shattering, or maybe a bottle exploding, split the air like a gunshot. Somewhere behind the hedge, someone had dropped something heavy. Ela flinched violently. A small, breathless whimper escaped her lips. She jerked backward, her body trembling, her hands clapping over her ears, though no sound would have reached her. Her chest rose and fell too quickly. Panic flooded her wide eyes. Maya reacted before thought. She wrapped her arms around the little girl, pulling her close, twisting her body to shield her. They toppled together, rolling down the short embankment beside the garden path. The world spun once, twice, until they landed hard near the edge of a decorative stone basin. Pain shot through Maya's collarbone where Ela's head had struck. But worse was the stillness that followed. Ela's body had gone limp. "No, no, no," Maya whispered, panic rushing through her veins. She brushed the child's hair back, her hands trembling. "Sweetheart, stay with me. Stay with me!" The crowd shouts rang out. The garden filled with motion. Guests spilling onto the patio, staff racing, security barking into radios. Heels clacked against stone. "Maya!" Someone shrieked, though Maya didn't turn. Her focus was only on the child in her arms. She hid her head. Maya said desperately to no one in particular, "She needs help." A tall figure shoved through the crowd. Grayson Hale. His face, usually composed and commanding, was pale with panic. He dropped to his knees beside Maya, scooping his daughter into his arms. "Ayla," he barked, his voice cracking. "Ella, look at me." The girl stirred faintly, eyes fluttering. Relief washed over Maya, but it lasted only a heartbeat. Grayson's gaze snapped to her. Sharp. Accusing. "What did you do to my daughter?" His words cut like knives. Sir, there was a noise." She panicked. "I caught her before you touched her." His voice was low, dangerous. "Who gave you permission to approach her?" She doesn't speak, but she signed back to me, Maya said, desperate. I know ASL, she talked to me. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Some staff exchanged uneasy glances. You're a temp, Grayson hissed. You're not even supposed to be near my daughter. Maya's throat tightened. I was trying to protect her. I don't need protection from people like you. The words landed like a slap, sharper than the cold night air. Something inside Maya cracked, not just from the humiliation but from the injustice. She had only wanted to help. From somewhere in the crowd, a guest's voice called out, I saw her. She approached the girl first. Drew her away. Grayson's face hardened, decision made. Without warning, he grabbed Maya by the back of her neck and shoved her forward. She stumbled, knees striking wet grass. The icy slap of water followed as she fell face first into the fountain's shallow pool. Whispers among the staff. The Hale estate had always been a house full of whispers, but after the night of the fountain and the quiet meetings in the garden, those whispers sharpened into pointed edges. In the kitchen, where pots clanged and steam rose from boiling kettles, the senior maids murmured among themselves in tones low enough to avoid rebuke, but loud enough to poison the air. They spoke of Maya as if she were reckless, a liability, someone who didn't know her place. She'll ruin herself, one scoffed while wiping a dish. Mark my words, Mr. Hale won't tolerate her interfering much longer. Another leaned closer and muttered, It isn't just him. Did you hear the guests last night? They said she was trying to get attention, using the child to make herself look important. The words hung heavy, as insidious as smoke, and though Maya pretended not to hear, every syllable lodged itself deep inside her chest. She carried their judgment silently as she moved about her work, but silence did not mean surrender. Each time she caught sight of Ila's eyes across a room, wide and searching, or when she felt the small tug of a hand on her apron as the girl wordlessly asked for acknowledgement, she knew she could not let gossip decide her actions. Still, it was hard to stand beneath the weight of so much suspicion. She had learned long ago that in households of wealth, staff were easily discarded, and reputations once tarnished were rarely restored. Yet when she remembered the little girl's trembling fingers signing friend, all of that fear paled in comparison to the thought of her being abandoned to silence once more. The party of masks. The next test came during a formal luncheon when polished cars lined the driveway and guests poured into the estate dressed in tailored suits and glittering jewelry. It was an event meant to impress investors, a performance where every detail was rehearsed and every smile was as carefully chosen as the imported wines. Ella was present, seated at the long table near her father, her white dress ironed to perfection, her curls arranged like golden ribbons. She looked the picture of an angelic child in a perfect family tableau, and yet her eyes darted nervously, her lips pressing together in the way of someone who felt invisible in a crowd. Throughout the meal, the men and women around her discussed stock markets, overseas partnerships, and political favors, their voices rising and falling with laughter that never reached their eyes. Not once did anyone address the girl. Not once did anyone pause to ask her what she thought or even if she wanted more juice. When her fork slipped and clattered against the plate, the man beside her chuckled dismissively. Shy little thing, isn't she? He murmured as if she could not understand, as if she were a piece of furniture instead of a living soul. Maya stood at the side of the room, tray in hand, her stomach tightening at the remark. She watched as Ila's hands twitched under the table, forming words no one saw. She was signing a sentence slowly, clumsily, but with determination. I want to say something. But to the eyes of those who refused to understand, it was nothing more than fidgeting. When the murmurs of laughter grew louder, Maya could not bear it. She shifted her tray, stepped closer, and bent ever so slightly as she refilled a glass near Ila's seat. Their eyes met. In that fleeting instant, Maya lifted her hand against her side where no one else could see and formed a single sign. Brave. Ella's expression changed at once. Her back straightened, her small chin lifted, and for the first time during the luncheon, she raised her hands above the table. The motion caught a few eyes, though most ignored it. She signed slowly, deliberately, her gray-blue eyes fixed on her father. I want to speak. The room fell into an awkward hush, the kind born not from respect but from discomfort. Someone cleared their throat. Another guest chuckled softly, dismissing it as childish nonsense. Grayson shifted in his chair, frowning as though her gestures were nothing more than a disruption to his performance. He laid a hand gently but firmly over hers, pressing them back to her lap. "Eat your lunch, sweetheart," he said, his voice firm but gentle, his eyes already returning to the investor beside him. The moment was over, erased as if it had never been. Maya felt the sting of tears at the back of her eyes but blinked them away quickly. She forced her tray higher, forced her posture straight. Ella's courage had been real, but once again, the world had refused to the cruel words later. After the luncheon ended and the guests spilled onto the patio for cigars and wine, Ella wandered away from the crowd, her rabbit tucked tightly in her arm. Maya, stationed nearby with a tray of empty glasses, noticed her slip toward the edge of the garden. She followed discreetly, ensuring the child was safe but giving her space. That was when she overheard it, the careless cruelty of people too powerful to filter their tongues. Two businessmen, leaning against the marble balustrade, spoke in hushed but audible tones. "It's a shame about his daughter," one said, exhaling a stream of smoke. "A man like Hale, he builds empires, commands industries, but his own child? Broken, can't even speak. How's that for irony?" The other laughed softly. "That's why he hides her away. A child like that? Liability. Doesn't fit the image. Investors want strength, not weakness, paraded around in white dresses." Maya froze, her blood running cold. She turned to look at Ela, who stood only a few steps away. The girl's face was pale, her small mouth trembling. Though she could not hear the full venom of their voices, she could read enough from their lips, and she understood far more than they believed. Her hands tightened around the rabbit until it seemed stretched. Tears welled in her eyes, unblinking, heavy, before she turned and bolted into the hedges. Maya's heart broke at the sight. She set down the tray without thinking and followed quickly, calling softly for her, though she knew no sound would reach her ears. She found Ella crouched behind the hedge, shoulders shaking, the rabbit pressed to her face. Without hesitation, Maya knelt and gathered the girl into her arms. For a moment, Ela resisted, stiff and trembling, but then she collapsed against her, sobs silent but body heaving. Her small hands pressed desperately into Maya's chest, signing through her tears. "Why don't they see me? Why don't they listen?" Maya held her tighter, her own eyes burning. She answered not with words at first, but with her steady embrace, anchoring the child in the storm. Finally, when Ella lifted her wet eyes, Maya signed back firmly, her hands unwavering. "You are not broken. You are not weak. They are blind, not you." Maya's defiance that evening as the household settled, Maya stood in her small quarters, replaying the afternoon over and over. The laughter of the businessmen echoed in her mind, mingling with the image of Ela's shaking shoulders. She had worked in many homes, had endured dismissals and insults, but she had never felt rage burn so fiercely in her chest as she had today. To insult her was one thing. She was used to invisibility. But to dismiss that child, to call her broken, to treat her silence as weakness, it was a cruelty Maya could not forgive. She thought of her mother again, of how she used to kneel beside children who had been told they were unworthy, guiding their hands until they realized they could shape the world in their own way. "Every voice matters," her mother would whisper, "even if it doesn't sound like everyone else's." That memory ignited something within Maya, a resolve sharper than fear. She knew she was risking her place in the household. She knew she was placing herself in direct opposition to the very pride of Grayson Hale. But she also knew this: silence could not go on forever. When Ela knocked timidly at her door later that night, clutching her rabbit, Maya invited her in without hesitation. The girl crawled onto the bed, curling up with her head on Maya's lap. Her hands moved tiredly. "Promise you won't leave." Maya's throat tightened. She brushed a curl from the girl's forehead and signed slowly, deliberately so there could be no doubt. "I promise. As long as you need me, I will listen." The turning point, the following week, brought another gathering, smaller but equally suffocating with pretense. Once again, Ela was paraded like decoration, once again ignored. But this time, Maya watched her carefully and saw the difference. Though the girl still sat quietly, though her hands still fidgeted beneath the table, her eyes burned with a new kind of fire. The humiliation, the cruel words, the comfort she had found in Maya's arms, they had all carved something deeper in her, something that looked dangerously close to defiance. When a guest asked offhandedly if she was mute, speaking as though she were not present, Ela lifted her chin and raised her hands boldly. "I can speak," she signed, her movements firm and deliberate. Maya, standing across the room, inhaled sharply, her heart swelling with pride and fear at once. The guest blinked in confusion, chuckled awkwardly, and turned back to his wine. Grayson shifted uncomfortably in his chair, murmuring, "Enough, Ela," before changing the subject. Once again her words dissolved into the void, unacknowledged, unseen. But this time Maya noticed something different in the girl's eyes. There was no collapse, no retreat into tears. Instead, there was steel, a silent vow that she would not stop trying. Maya understood then that the world might refuse to listen 1,000 times. But as long as one person did, as long as one person translated her silence into strength, Ayla would not give up. And Maya promised herself that if no one else would stand beside her, she always would. Walls of Pride morning in the Hale estate was a different kind of spectacle. It lacked the dazzling chandeliers and champagne flutes of the night before, but it was no less orchestrated. Staff moved like clockwork, polishing the marble floors, replenishing vases with fresh orchids, preparing for the day's inevitable stream of meetings, visitors, and demands. The house itself seemed alive with purpose, but not with warmth. It was like a body without a heartbeat, running on strict routine. In the center of it all stood Grayson Hale, a man who had built empires on algorithms and acquisitions, who had learned long ago to harden his heart in pursuit of success. That morning, he stood in his private office with its towering glass walls overlooking the city. His suit was pressed, his tie straight, his hair gleaming with a silver sheen that gave him an air of timeless control. Yet his reflection in the window betrayed a restlessness, a flicker of unease. He had not slept well. He told himself it was because of the market's volatility, the pressures of an upcoming merger. But deep down he knew last night's incident haunted him. His daughter cradled limp in a maid's arms, his own voice rising in anger instead of gratitude, the guest's eyes on him, weighing his every reaction. Grayson prided himself on control, on never showing weakness, but there had been fear in his chest last night. Genuine, bone-deep fear. For a moment he had seen not a billionaire, not a master of the room, but a desperate father clutching his child, and he had hated it. Hated how quickly that fear had been twisted into fury. Fury at the maid for daring to touch her, fury at the world for daring to expose his vulnerability. To acknowledge Maya's actions as noble would have been to admit he could not protect his daughter himself. And Grayson Hale was a man who lived by a single truth. He needed no one. When his assistant knocked lightly on the door, announcing that breakfast was ready, he closed the file on his desk with sharp precision and masked his thoughts beneath the cool armor of indifference. He walked toward the dining hall, already pushing the incident into the vault where he stored all things inconvenient. Yet even as he rehearsed his calm, dismissive expression, a small part of him, buried and unwanted, recalled the way his daughter's fingers had fluttered with urgency, trying to speak in a language he still refused to learn. A table of silence. The dining room was bathed in soft morning light, the long oak table gleaming under the weight of polished silverware and porcelain plates. Fruit bowls, steaming bread baskets, and pitchers of fresh juice lined the table with mechanical perfection. Yet despite the abundance, the atmosphere was sparse, hollow, as though the food was laid out for photographs rather than nourishment. Ella sat near the end of the table, her small feet swinging just above the floor. She picked at a strawberry with listless motions, her eyes distant, her lips pressed together in the way children do when they are determined not to cry. Her father entered briskly, his presence filling the room like a shadow. He greeted no one, offered no smile. He simply sat at the head of the table, unfolding the day's financial report with the same focus others might reserve for scripture. "Eat your breakfast," he said, not looking at her. His voice was firm, not unkind but transactional, as though the act of eating was another item to check off a list. Ella glanced at him, then down at her plate. Her hands twitched beneath the table, words forming silently in the language of her heart. She signed, "I want to tell you something." But of course he did not notice. He never noticed. She could have shouted at the top of her lungs and it would have been no different. For in her world, silence was not only in her ears but reflected in the eyes of those who refused to hear her. Maya entered quietly, her wet humiliation from the night before, hidden beneath a freshly pressed uniform. She carried a carafe of orange juice, her face composed, her steps steady, though she felt the weight of eyes on her, waiting for her to falter. She poured juice into Grayson's glass with practiced grace, then turned to Ila's. The girl looked up, their eyes met, and in that instant something flickered. Recognition, trust. A quiet bond forged in the garden steps and sealed in the tumble down the embankment. Under the table, hidden from Grayson's sight, Ila's small hands shaped another word. Friend. Maya's lips curved almost imperceptibly. She dared not reply with her own hands, but she let her gaze linger for just a heartbeat longer than appropriate. In that look was a promise, silent but steady. I see you still. I will always see you. Grayson's eyes flicked up just then, and Maya quickly straightened, her face neutral. His gaze lingered on her, sharp and cold, as though daring her to step out of place again. He said nothing, but the warning was clear. The rest of the meal passed in silence. Not the silence of peace, but of walls too thick to be broken, of words unspoken, of truths buried under the weight of pride. And for Ila, it was another morning of learning that her world was full of people who could hear but refused to listen. The blindness of a father. Later that day, as the staff scurried to prepare the house for another round of meetings and social visits, Grayson met privately with his head of staff. His voice was low, clipped, efficient, the way one spoke of logistics or finances. The temp maid, he said, not even using Maya's name, will be removed at the end of the week. I don't want distractions around my daughter. The head of staff hesitated. Sir, forgive me, but the girl seemed attached. She responded well to her. Grayson's jaw tightened, his pen tapping once against the polished desk. My daughter does not need charity. She will learn discipline, routine, not sentimentality from someone who doesn't belong in her world. The staff member bowed slightly, retreating without further argument. But unease lingered in his eyes. He had seen the way Ila looked at the maid. He had seen the desperate flutter of her hands. But in this house no one questioned Grayson Hale twice. Upstairs, behind the safety of her nursery walls, Ila sat cross-legged on the rug, her favorite stuffed rabbit clutched in her arms. She replayed the memory of last night, Maya's arms around her, the way she had not hesitated, the way her eyes had said you matter without a single word. Ella lifted her hands and signed to the rabbit, repeating what she had tried to say before. Not her fault. She helped me. The rabbit, of course, did not answer, but she signed again anyway, stubborn, hopeful, as though by practicing she could one day force the world to see. And in another corner of the house, Maya polished silver trays in silence, each movement steady, her mind far away. She thought of the girl's trembling hands, the word friend shaped with such fragile courage. Maya knew the rules of this world well. Staff were invisible, their stories unimportant, their voices expendable. But she also knew what her mother had taught her, and she felt it burning inside her now. Some truths were too sacred to be silenced. Grayson Hale could blind himself with pride. He could wall himself away in glass towers of wealth. But Maya had already seen the cracks. And through those cracks a little girl was reaching, desperate to be heard. Humiliation in the water. The cold water clung to Maya's skin, seeping into her apron and blouse, stealing her breath in a single gasp. For one disoriented moment, all she saw was a blur of lights fractured by rippling water, a universe distorted by humiliation. She pushed herself up quickly, coughing, her chest aching as her dignity drowned in front of dozens of staring eyes. Her wet hair clung to her cheeks and her hands trembled as she tried to wipe her face, but she could not wipe away the sting of shame. Laughter, low, mocking, bubbled from somewhere in the crowd, not cruel enough to be open but sharp enough to slice at her pride. She turned her gaze instinctively toward the child, desperate for reassurance, for any sign that what had just happened was not in vain. Ella was in her father's arms, but her small hands moved with urgency, shaping words no one else seemed willing to see. Her fingers trembled as she signed, not her fault. She helped me. Her little face was pale, her lips trembling, her gray-blue eyes wide with desperation. But the guests, the staff, the bodyguards, none of them understood. To them it looked like a child flailing, grasping at air. And to Grayson Hale, whose pride weighed heavier than truth, her frantic signs were invisible. She's frightened, he muttered sharply, clutching the girl closer. Don't strain yourself, sweetheart. Daddy has you now. Maya's heart thudded painfully. She wanted to shout, to translate the words pouring from the child's hands to make them see, but she stood dripping wet in the fountain, her voice drowned by the hierarchy of wealth. Who would listen to a maid's word against the master of the house? Who would believe her intentions were pure? She clenched her fists, nails biting into her palms, willing herself not to cry in front of them. Weakness would only confirm their assumptions. A senior staff member hurried forward, his voice low but firm, addressing Maya as though she were a problem to be removed rather than a human being. "You've disrupted the evening enough. Go inside, change your clothes. You'll be spoken to later." His tone brooked no argument, though his eyes flickered with something almost like pity. Maya lowered her gaze and climbed out of the fountain, each step heavier than the last, her shoes squelching water with every move. Her skin burned with shame, but it wasn't her own degradation that carved deepest. It was the image of the little girl, hands pleading in the air, ignored by the very people who claimed to love her. That, Maya realized with a cold shiver, was the true cruelty of this place. Alone in the quiet later that night, long after the guests had retreated to their cars and the last wine glass had been polished, Maya sat alone in the servants' quarters. The room was small, its walls painted in the same neutral cream as every staff room she had known, the kind of place designed to be invisible. Her damp clothes hung limply over the chair near the radiator, and she sat wrapped in a blanket, staring at her hands. Her palms still remembered the shape of Ila's trembling shoulders, the tiny weight of the child pressed against her chest. The memory replayed endlessly, the loud crack, the fall, the limpness of the little body. Maya closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing, but guilt gnawed at her insides even though she had done nothing wrong. She had tried to protect her. She had succeeded. Yet in the eyes of everyone who mattered in that house, she was a transgressor, a servant who had dared step out of line. She thought about her mother then, a teacher who had spent her life working with children who were deaf, autistic, or otherwise overlooked. It was from her that Maya had learned sign language, not out of necessity, but out of love. "Every child deserves to be heard," her mother used to say. "Sometimes you just have to learn a new language to listen." That belief had guided Maya all her life, a quiet principle in a noisy world. And now, here she was in a mansion overflowing with excess, where one small child sat on stone steps unseen. The world inside those walls might have been deaf to Ila's voice, but Maya had heard it. She had seen her. That mattered, even if no one else acknowledged it. Still, uncertainty gnawed at her. She had overheard whispers in the kitchen after the guests had gone, about how Mr. Hale was furious, about how Maya might be dismissed by morning. For some staff, losing this job would be a stumble. For her, it could mean losing the chance to pay rent next month, losing the ability to send money back home. But more than fear of dismissal, what haunted her most was the thought of never seeing Ila again, never giving her the chance to be heard. Maya lay down eventually, pulling the thin blanket over her, but sleep did not come easily. The sound of laughter from the ballroom still echoed faintly in her memory, but beneath it she could almost see Ila's small hands signing into the void. The thought pressed heavy on her heart as her eyes finally drifted shut. A child's defiance. The following morning, sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the estate, gilding the corridors in soft gold. Maya moved silently through the dining room, refilling glasses, aligning cutlery, her presence as small as the staff were trained to keep it. The night's humiliation still clung to her like a shadow, but she held her chin steady, refusing to let anyone see the bruise on her spirit. Then she saw her. Ila sat at the far end of the long dining table, her tiny frame dwarfed by the towering chair. A plate of fruit sat untouched in front of her, the vibrant strawberries and melon cubes as unwelcoming as the guests from the night before. Grayson Hale was already absorbed in his tablet, scanning financial reports, his coffee untouched but his mind elsewhere. His world was numbers and headlines, not the small girl sitting quietly at his side. Maya paused, unsure if she dared linger. But then Ila's eyes lifted. Their gazes met, and in that instant Maya felt a jolt of recognition, mutual, silent, unbreakable. Slowly, under the table, Ella's small hands moved. Hidden from her father's sight, she signed a single word. "Friend." The breath caught in Maya's throat. A warmth spread through her chest, burning away some of the chill that had clung to her since the fountain. She dared not respond with her own hands, not in plain sight, but she let her lips curve into the gentlest smile, and in that moment, despite the chasm of wealth, status, and misunderstanding between them, Maya knew this was not the end. It was only the beginning.